Go ahead.
Cool. So, so the lightning flows is pretty much otherwise known as the visual flows, as we know it for a while. And this is one of the topic which has not been talked a lot about in the community. There are reasons for that. I'll come back to that pointer later. But Lightning, it's now renamed as Lightning Flows. Earlier it was just Visual Flows because it was initially available in Classic,
Okay.
and we called it as Visual Flows. And it's the same product. Now it has been enabled for Lightning. It's been in Lightning for a while, but then now it has been pretty much compatible with Lightning than before. So they now renamed this product as Lightning Flows, and they added more features to it as well to make the Lightning experience more seamless. And so let's see what it's all about. So so what is lightning flows? Basically, we need to understand why we need lightning flows rather than going with a it could be Visual Force Apex, or you can use a process builder. So basically, the flows here, the visual flows, are we need not mix up the flows with the process builder, because process builder has a specific set of goals to do in Salesforce platform, and Lightning Flows has a separate set of goals to do in the platform. So Lightning Flows is basically a visual representation of a flow. For example, if you're designing a flow chart for a process, for your business process, if you're designing a screen flows for your process, so these flows, instead of going for Apex and Visual Force option, there are certain capabilities that Lightning Flows can offer you. So Lightning Flows can interact with the user on the screen. Lightning Flows can be designed as a wizard on the screen, like a step one, step two type of application. And also Lightning Flows can be automated at the background, and you don't have to see a screen essentially, but you can pretty much use it like a process builder. But then you would be defining each step of the whole flow, what needs to happen on a record update, or might be outcome from manipulated result, and then this lightning flows should kick in and do some other record updates, or it could be other manipulations on a different object. So you can use for that, and lightning flows can be triggered as a timed execution, where you can ask lightning flows to execute after a certain period of time after a record update. Like pretty much like delaying the process of certain things based on a record update in an object. So these are like very general applications, and when you get more expertise in Lightning, you can be more creative in using Lightning flows in completely different way as well. But these are like very straightforward applications of Lightning as a basic. And yeah, coming back to why it is not popular. So the first reason is very obvious. Lightning flows needs a bit of research when you start with the lightning flows. So it's not like very straightforward, and it is not a very easy tool to get onto it on the first shot. So it's pretty much like an architect in an organization, how you perform. You need to design the whole application, think about scenarios, you need to think about the implications of the decisions you make. So you can make that analogy to this lightning flows. Like when you start designing a lightning flow, you need to first think about the scenarios, what you're going to do with that lightning flow. So what is your expected goal there, and what you're trying to achieve. So let's consider an example. Say you want to build a screen wizard. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And step 4, you're finishing the screen wizard and then submitting an application. So you can choose to go with Visual Force and Apex, or you can choose to go with Lightning Flow. So both the ways you can achieve the goal, but you need to consider on the complexity of that. So if I start with the wizard, is it going to be a straightforward input-output application? Am I going to just get the user inputs, submit it to the application, and then get the record created in the Salesforce? If that is the case, Lightning Flows will be the most preferable option than Visual Force, and Apex. The advantage with the Lightning Flows is that it's very it is very less and time consuming, and the Visual Force and Apex will take around like maybe a couple of days to complete the wizard, to put in all those fields and mapping them to the object, and doing a update operation or the backend in the Apex class, and writing a test class for the Apex class. So looking at all those efforts, you can build the Lightning Flows in just 2 hours. So that's the level of time effectiveness in Lightning Flows, and also it's more of a declarative approach. So when your business needs a very declarative approach and you don't want to spend a lot of money in maintaining the application, and if your application is going to be pretty much a smaller application that doesn't need a development team to be around to keep maintaining the application, you may need to think about Lightning Flows at that point of time. So yeah, so Lightning Flows, when it comes, you have to think in a lot of directions. So that's one complexity, where the more logic you put inside the business process, the more complex it's going to get. And also, the more complex it's going to get, you need to think about like n number of scenarios. So that's the only complexity. And yeah, of course, it takes a little bit of time to get used to Lightning Flows. And once you got used to Lightning Flows, and if you start using it like day-to-day basis, you would completely forget about writing a code for it. So your thought process will be more into flows, and you can pretty much design any kind of application with Lightning Flows, except for few Salesforce limitations, which obviously comes with any feature in Salesforce. So Lightning Flows also has few limitations, which I'll come back to that later. But so for these reasons, people don't prefer Lightning Flows, because as a consultant, as an admin, they need to put in a little more effort to learn this Lightning Flows first, and then get onto the implementation part of it. So comparative to other out-of-box features in Salesforce, it needs a little more effort from your side to get onto this feature. So that's the only part which bothers everyone to go with Lightning Flows. And I think I would say that is more of a not needed scary part, because once you get to learn the whole feature, you would feel more comfortable than ever. And few other limitations, like there are a number of executions that you cannot do in Lightning Flows. For example, if you want to loop through a set of records, and there is a limitation of 2000 records per transaction. So whenever you hit a button and there is a manipulation going on in the backend in Lightning Flows, the Lightning Flows can do execution of 2000 times, and beyond that, the Lightning Flows will fail. So that's another limitation. So if you have like millions of records, and if you want to build a flow for flow around those records, I would not suggest Lightning Flows for that. You can still use Lightning Flows in different other ways, but still it will require a development effort for that. So in those cases, Lightning Flows would not be the right solution. So Lightning Flows would be the right solution when you want to create a record, you want to design a form, you want to loop through a very smaller set of records, like within thousands of records. So that's a scenario we can look at the Lightning Flows. And there is a known issue with the Lightning Flows, that is the date field. So whenever you use the date field, especially with the date time field, the time zone always consumes the GMT time, and also it reflects the same GMT time on your stored record. So that's a bit of a I would say feature in progress or feature yet to be fixed. So I was talking to Salesforce support about this, and they told they'll be notifying the internal team. And I don't know when that fix will be available, but looks like it's how it is working now. So if you try to map a date field with your datetime field or datetime field with your date field, the difference of GMT with your local time zone, it will not be as you see in your process builders or any other out of box features. It'll be always GMT for the datetime zone, and date field will be pointing to your local time. So that's another issue. When you use a lot of date fields, you should be very careful about manipulating that logic to bring back to your local time. And so the Lightning Flows has a designer limitation as well. Like you cannot build a 2-column page. You cannot build stylings around your Lightning page. You can still do it, but as a configurator, if you completely go with like straightforward out-of-box solution, there is no like out-of-box solution for designing your page to a pretty looking UI. So it's pretty much standard Salesforce UI, which they will provide, and it's going to be a single column application. It will not be a multi-column, or you cannot be doing it into a sectioned layout or any other layout that you want to design apart from what it is being offered out of box. So those are the things which limit people from entering into Lightning Flows. Rather, they choose to go with process builders, or they choose to go with the Visual Force in the Apex. Okay, so coming back to the same point, when to use the Lightning Flows. So when you are an admin or a consultant in a firm, and you want to use a declarative approach to present something that has to be done by a developer. For example, a simple single page application, like entering certain details into form, or it could be a wizard structure of input screens that would create a record or update a record. You can do record lookup as well in that, and the only limitation is that you cannot loop through more than 1,000 times on the dataset. So as long as your dataset is within 1,000 or so, you can always choose to go with Lightning Flows. And if you want to have your business process to have a very less development dependency, so at that point you can go with the Lightning Flows. And if you think your business process should be paused in the middle of your runtime, and then you want to do certain record updates at the backend and then continue the process, so Lightning Flows offers you a pause button where you can like click on pause and then freeze the whole process for a while, and then you can resume that process back again when you're done with your backend data update, or it could be some other process builder that is executing at that point of time. Say on screen 1, you're updating a record in the object A, and screen 2, you're updating a record in the object B. In screen A, once you're done with that, you can just click a pause, and then you can trigger the process builder and then come back to it when the process builder is completed. So that's a little bit of flexibility that Lightning Flows gives, and this also can be achieved in Apex. There are many ways that we can delay the process. So it's like another way of declarative way of doing the same Apex operations in Lightning Flows. And you can use quick actions in Lightning Flows. So for example, if your application is having some custom component or custom functionality built already by a developer, and you want to use that inside your Lightning Flows, you can bring in those components inside Lightning Flows. Lightning Flows offers you to bring in any custom component, Lightning components into your Lightning flows. You can bring in quick actions into your Lightning flows and so on. So yeah, and always remember that Lightning flows should be completely planned. So when I say planned, point A to point B, you should be knowing all the scenarios, and also you should be knowing all the error scenarios for that. So as long as you know what is happening in every step, and you know what are all the scenarios it will fail, you know what are all the scenarios it will get into, as long as you know the business process, both functionally and technically, what it has to do in the system, you should be good to go with the Lightning flows. So if you have any ambiguity, like, yeah, I wouldn't know at this point of time what would be the outcome. So that is something to keep a step back and think about before going into the Lightning flow. Because once you start doing the Lightning flow, you're investing some time, and then in the middle of your design, if you feel it's not going to work out, it's going to be a waste of time for you. And also, it's similar to how you do a flowchart. So it's better to do a flowchart before you start the Lightning flow. It's going to be the same flowchart coming into your designer. And so it's better to design your flowchart first, and you know all the outputs of each stage, and you know what you're doing. As long as you're good with that, you can completely transform that flowchart into your designer. All right. Going forward, let's go into a demo. Give me a minute. Let me log in into my sandbox, or I can make this one here. Okay, so I have built a small demo application called the Lightning Flow. I have two tabs. One is job application and the work histories. So the basic concept of this application is I'm going to build a job application record, and for each job application record corresponds to a particular candidate. Say, for example, in this, it's me, and I'm going to, let's assume a scenario where I'm being interviewed in one of the companies, and the recruiter who is going to recruit me, they're going to assess me based on the interview. So whenever I do an interview and the interviewer gets a feedback, they're going to put this details back into this application. So once they put the details back into the application, so the recruiter can go back to this job application record, and then they can look at what are all the recordings that has been done. And also we have a child object called work history, so that will list the whole work history for that particular applicant. So for example, if Guhan is working for a company, and if I want to see what is his work history for the past 10 years or past 5 years, so I can look at the records like a child records for this main master record. So what I have done is, so I have two flows. So one flow will present me a questionnaire. Sorry, let me finish this. So the one flow will present me a questionnaire, something like this, and once I fill in, and the performance factor will be filled in based on my interview performance, and then once I go to the next screen, that's going to submit my record, and that's going to get updated here in the master record. So once that is done, and the recruiter, after talking to me, they're going to put in my work history. Say, hey, he has worked for 3 companies before, so what is the employer name, start date, end date, and then they're going to submit that. And once they have submitted, they wanted to see this work history, they can go ahead and then click on the application number, and once they search the application number, it will give them the count of employers that have worked before. So let's see how it is being designed, and then I'll walk you through this whole demo. Okay, so I have basically three flows for that. So the first flow is going to be the flow for this questionnaire. So my goal for this questionnaire is to present a screen with some input fields. And once the input fields are filled in, I'm going to go to the next screen that will say whether this candidate has been approved. Sorry, this candidate has been selected, or if he needs another round of interview, or if he's like outstanding, he can directly be hired. So that's the whole logic behind this flow. So if you go to, sorry, I should be going from the flows. So if you go to setup, you can type in flows here. So this is where you will start designing a flow. So if you go to the flow, this is where you will start designing a new flow. So let me show you the flow designer first, and then we can jump into the walkthrough of that flow, which is already. Cool. So this is the flow designer where you would be designing a new flow. So for example, if you are presenting a screen to the users, and then if you want to design a UI plus some logic behind that UI. So here on the left-hand side sidebar, you would see three tabs here. The first tab is the resources to build your flow. So these are pretty much like your flowchart elements if you have seen in any of the flowchart designs. It's pretty much self-explanatory. Like you have a screen, so this is the place where you will design the elements for your UI. So if you see here, you would be giving the screen name, say screen 1. You can give any name. It doesn't have to be like a proper business names, because it's not going to be shown up on your UI or something like that. This name is fully for internal purposes that you can understand. So show header and show footer. This is something that will show up like this. So if you see here, the questionnaire, so this is the header part, and the next button lies in the footer part. So if you don't mention the header and footer, the next button will not come as like a section of a footer. It will be all in one, just one section without a header and footer. And you also have a navigation options where you can choose. So when I will walk through the flows, you can see a finish button. Let me do a quick walkthrough. So if you see here, so instead of next, okay. Yeah, I'll talk about this error later. So instead of next, you can also put in a finish button there. So finish button will say that, hey, this is the end screen of this flow, and you can, if you click on finish, the whole flow will terminate there, and then it will come back to your original UI, the page where you were in earlier, or else it will keep giving you the next button. And allow previous is like it's an option to show the previous button. If you have like a screen before your screen, then you can click previous to go back to the previous screen to change some values, or it could be verifying some values like that. And this is where I was talking about the pass button. So this pass button, this can pass the whole flow. Like when you click on pass, it will completely freeze your whole flow execution. Whatever you have done in the screens before that would be executed, obviously. And if you want to do certain operations in between of your whole business process, then you can pretty much add a pause button there and pause your complete execution, and then go back, do whatever you want to do in the other object, and then come back to here and then continue the execution. For example, if the second object is expecting certain values from your first object, then you can go ahead and do your update in your first object and then come back here to continue the execution. So that's one advantage of having flows rather than doing with Apex code. And here are the screen elements where you can put in pretty much like a basic form. Like you can put in text box, text area, that's going to be like a small bunch of lines that you can put in, and the number field, currency field, and date field. These need not be basically fields. It can be just an input box, just an input value in the screen. It need not be basically mapped to a particular field in your object. So that's the flexibility you get into the Lightning flows. It's pretty much designing a custom UI for your application, and it need not be necessarily mapped to any object. And if you build a login screen, then you can keep this password text box where your characters will be masked completely. And we can have checkboxes, we can have radio buttons, we can have drop-down lists, and we can have multi-select pick lists. And we can have like if you want to show up like a success message in the on the screen, you can throw in this display text, and then you can fill it up any way you want. Say if you want to if you want to have a basic formatting, that is also available with the display text. So this becomes like displaying a message to the user, hey, so and so's been approved or something like that. If you're going through some approval process, and this is the Lightning component part which I was talking. You can throw in any Lightning component which is already developed by some other developers. And so, for example, that Lightning components is basically reusable for any applications, right? So the Lightning components might be generic to your application, and if you want to throw in the Lightning components and then set up as a separate process, you can do that. And field setting is basically whatever the field you put in. So those field attributes would be the field setting. So you can pretty much define the label, unique name. And when I say unique name, it's going to be unique. So you need to decide what type of names you're going to use. If you use like text box 1, I cannot use text 1 in any other place in the whole flow. So until you go to a new flow, you cannot use this text 1 name in anywhere, so it's pretty much unique. And the type of the box is pretty much predefined. And also you can set a default value. It's pretty much similar to how you create a field in your object, but it's not binded directly to your object right now. So you need to do the binding if you want to do, or you can just keep it as like a screen variable or screen parameter, so that it just shows up on your screen and doesn't do any record updates or anything like that. If you want to do a record update, obviously you have to bind it to a record field in this flow. I will show you that. So this is about designing a screen, and this is basically the decision box. So whenever you bring in a decision box, you just name the decision box, whichever the name you want to give. And on the left hand side, if you see the editable outcomes, so this is basically like just assume this decision box representation. So you have 2 outcomes for any decision by default, and you can keep increasing your outcomes. Like it can have like 3 outcomes, it can have like 4 outcomes. So each outcome will be represented by the downward arrow mark or the sideward arrow mark. So each outcome will be mapping to a particular next step. So once your decision is made, you need to tell the flow to go to the next step. So what is the next step? It could be either next screen, or it could be a record update, it could be a record lookup, or it could be a Lightning component again to show up, or quick action. So, but whatever the outcomes comes from the decision, so that will be one outcome on the runtime. But you can define the outcomes like, hey, if the value is 1, go this direction. If the value is 2, go this direction. If the value is 3, go this direction. So if I have like 5 values in a pick list, and just as an analogy, if I have like 5 pick list values, and for each pick list value, I want to have a different outcome. For pick list 1, I would say present a screen. For pick list 2, for pick list value 2, I would say present a code, do some logic on the record lookup, and then come back to the next screen. And for pick list value 3, I can say end the whole process. If the user selects pick list value 3, end the whole process. He doesn't have to go through any of the screens. So you can define whatever you want to define. So you would be giving any name in here, and you would be selecting the object in here. So I will explain all this when I walk you through the other flow. I'm just explaining you what are all the elements present in the each component here inside the palette. So here you would be defining what is a source parameter you want to take decision based on, and you would define the operator, say equal to or not equal to, contains, starts with, anything which corresponds to that particular resource. And you would define the value here. Say my picklist values, for example, if it is a picklist value, I would say my picklist value variable, and I would say the operator equal to, value could be like 1. And if this condition is satisfied, then what it should do. So that would be the outcome. So I'll show you how it works in the flow. But this is how you'll define in here, and you can add multiple conditions as well. You can define whether it's an AND or it's an OR. It's pretty much similar to how you do in Process Builder. Yeah, if you have done a Process Builder, it's pretty much similar to that. Then the variable assignment. So this assignment will be like, say I have a query written from, not a query, I mean, like I did a record lookup, and I captured a field called status. And if the status value is equal to open, I will put the decision box. If it is open, then assign that status value to some other variable here. So it's like, if you guys know programming, you can relate it to how you do a variable assignment. If you don't know programming, you can relate it to how we do assignment in the Process Builder. So on a record update, how you map your variables, your captured variables to a particular field value. So that's a similar fashion here. Here, it's not a record value you would be assigning to. You would be assigning to another variable. So you're pretty much saying that, hey, hold this status value temporarily for some time until the execution of this flow. So you can define a variable, say a status value, and you can equate that operator equals to, and you will say the object variable which you have captured. I'll explain each and every of this in the flow which I have already designed. And looping this is the one major advantage of using flows. So this is basically looping through your records. So programmatically, you can relate it to looping through your records. If you want to relate it to a declarative approach, I would say you would be seeing a list of accounts in your list views, right? So let's say you want to search for one particular account in a list of 100 accounts. So this is the manual. You can relate it to the manual way of searching for an account in that list of 100 accounts. So this is like a automated way of doing that. So I would say, hey, look up from application object. Okay, I need to define a variable for that. Yeah, so look up from, say, if I have a collection of variables, so S object collection means it's a object collection. So if I have an object collection here, and I would say which order it should sort, and I would say which variable that has to be assigned to. Say, if I have a collection of job applications, hey, look up through the whole list of job applications, sort it in ascending order, and for each job application, it should be assigning it to a particular variable. So for job application 1 to 10, for each execution, so this looping will happen like recursively in one single transaction. So you can relate it to like how a machine going into your list view, looking at all your records. So it will go one by one. So job application number 1, I'm picking up the job application number, putting it inside a variable, local variable, and then I'm going to take this variable to other step to do the manipulation. So if the other step could be, hey, match this captured job application number from the record 1 to the variable I have in my screen. So if those two match, then that is the record I'm looking for. Okay, if it is not matching, then come back again to the second record. So that is the looping. So it will go back again to the second record, capture the name of the number of the job application, and match it with the local variable I had. And if it doesn't match, again it will go back to the third record. So it will keep doing this in like microseconds. It will do like thousands of records in the microseconds. And once it identifies one job application record, it will assign that particular job application record to the variables which you have already instructed to do, and it will go to the next step. Until then, it will keep looping. And this is where the limitation comes. This looping can happen only 2000 times in a transaction. And if there is any other transactions going on before your looping, that also counts against that execution. So, for example, there is 4 steps before this looping, then you can consider there can be only 2000 minus 4 transactions in this looping. So that's one limitation with the Salesforce Lightning flows, where you cannot have more than 2000 iterations or 2000 executable elements inside a flow. That's looping. And for looping the source, as I told, this looping should have a variable here, right? So as I showed up you, so it should be either a collection of just a collection of variables. Collection of variables could be like a list of colors I like. So that is like a static list that is not coming from any object. It's just a user defined list. And this could be a collection of object also. It could be a list of account numbers from account object. So only these types of list you can loop through. And the list here, right now there is no variable defined for that. So I'm going to show you where you can define for that list. And once you define that list there, it will appear up here. So you can search for that list name, and then you can bring it up just here. And this loop is to instruct that go through that list of S object and then match that each iteration with your locally hold variable. So for that, to generate that list, you would be doing a fast lookup. So basically, there are 2 types of lookups you can do. So lookups is not a literal meaning of looking up your, not the lookup relationship what you see in the object. It's not a relationship. This lookup is like the literally dictionary meaning of lookup. So looking up a record, looking up a collection of record, it's what it means. The lookup relationship which we have in object is different. So that is like a relationship between 2 objects. So there are 2 types of lookups you can do. One is record lookup, where you do only one single record. Say, I want to look up on the job application object. So I have this. Yeah, I have this custom object called application. So I'm instructing this record lookup to look up into the application record and what are all the fields that I should be looking up. Before I look up, I should define the criteria, right? So I'm not going to look into the application object for hundreds of records. I'm going to look up to application object for certain specific set of records. So I say status equals to open. So if you see, if I define the status field here, I can pull up all the pick list values here. So I say look up into the application record, look up for the status that matches with open. So it can pull down like 10 records for me instead of going through the 100 records. And out of this 10 records, I would say, so this is like, this could be like hundreds of records. So when I say, when I want to get one particular record, so this is like a record lookup. So this cannot hold more than one record. So what I would say is look up onto the ID. So ID is going to be the unique ID for the whole organization. And this application object can have only one unique ID, right? So I would say, let's say some number. So this number is going to be unique for the whole application. And this number can be contained in only one record in the whole application. So for these scenarios, you can choose this record lookup. which will pull up only one record. So I would say look up on the application where ID matches with this value. And okay, now it will bring up the record. So what you want to capture from that record? So I want to capture certain fields. So I want to capture the status field for that particular record. So here is where you will create a variable. So you can either create a SObject variable. As I told you, SObject variable will directly bind to a particular record in your, not particular record, it will bind to your custom object or a standard object. But a normal variable is like locally hold variable. Like you can say, hey, status value is a variable name, and that will hold whatever I captured in this record. Say I want to say status value. You cannot leave space in between this unique name. And you can define the data types. There's only very primitive number of data types that you can use in flows. That is also another, I would not say disadvantage. It's a kind of a limitation where you can use only these data types inside your flow. So this is going to be ID value. So I will define as text, and I would say, so this is like if you have been worked in programming, they would call it as global accessor types, but to explain in a declarative way, you are defining whether this variable should be exposed inside the flow, or it should be expecting an input from outside the flow, or it should be sending an output to the from flow to the outside. It's like either you are going to use this variable inside, just only inside the flow, or you're going to use this variable for fetching information from outside, or you're going to use this variable as a messenger, like sending this variable from flows to some other application or to the UI. And if you're going to use this variable for both the purposes, you can choose input output. To be on the safer side, you can always use input output. There is no harm in using it, but if you are concerned about your security model, and if you are concerned about using sensitive data, I would say choose these options based on your use case. So if this variable is not going to be used anywhere outside your flows, you're not bringing this variable you're not exposing this variable value to outside the Lightning flows, or either on the UI, or it could be passing to some other component. If you're not using for those purposes, you can use private. And for input, like for fetching a value from outside the application, like user input will be input value, input only. And for sending the information back to the screen would be output only. And if you're going to do the both, then you would choose input and output. And as I said, you can also set a default value. Say I can also set open here as a hard-coded default value, or you can also use already existing variables if there is any. If you had already created a variable, it will show up here. If you haven't created any variable, you can have two options. Either you can use a global constant, like it's pretty much like null value. Empty string is pretty much a null value. Or you can also use the flow variables where say this default value should be a current date time, and if it should hold some other fault message. So all these messages can be useful to show up the error message on your records. I'll come back to those scenarios, but these are all the constants for the system variables that you have. So these are little advanced level of designing a flow, but I'm just showing up you what is available in flows. So once you click OK, the variable has been created, and you will see the variable representation as like this. So anywhere when you say you're going to use a variable, like variable is literally a placeholder inside your flows. So this variable can be used for input-output screens, or it can be used locally inside your flows. Any representation of variable would be like this, like curly braces and exclamation. And this is like a syntax. Like you just need to follow this for representing variables anywhere in the application. And you can also capture more than one fields, like keep capturing like 10 fields out of this one particular record. And once you click OK, so I need to delete all these empty things. So once you click OK, your record lookup would be, oh, sorry. So I would say lookup application record. So this is going to be one record. So when I place this flow component inside this designer, so whenever, say it could be a screen, from the screen it could connect to this one. So I would be getting a variable in the screen, and I'll be looking at this record lookup. So whatever the variable I captured in the screen, instead of this hard-coded value, you would be using the variable. For example, let's say it's a stupid thing to use here now, but logically it doesn't make sense here. But you should say if you had like a record ID already captured in your previous step, you can use that variable like this here, where ID matches with my record ID. Then pull that one particular record, capture this status from that record, and store it inside this variable. So this is all you do inside this record lookup. And going back to the fast lookup. So fast lookup is basically collection of the records. So right now we did one record from the application object. So let's do a collection of application object. Collection of application records. So you will define again which object you are going to choose. So if you know the name of the custom object, you can choose that here. So once you choose the object, based on that, the filter criteria will appear. Again, I would say here you are going to get a collection of records. So you should be planning that, like, the value basically should return you a collection, not just one record. So I'm going to say status is equal to open. So this will get me all the records of the application with the status open. And what I'm going to do after getting the collection, I'm going to store that collection inside a collection variable. So I'm going to create, if you see here, there's only two variables you can create. So I'm going to create a collection variable. The collection variable is basically a placeholder for dumping your list of the list of the records that you collected in that step. So I'm going to say collection, just a variable name. So let's say where. So this is just a best practice to denote where, so that you know that it is a variable that you created. And I would say I'm going to have it as private. I'm going to use it inside it. And since it is a collection of one particular object, so you need to define the object name also. So I'm going to again define object name as application. So I created a collection variable. So just because we created here doesn't mean that it's going to be used only here. So this collection variable will be available anywhere in the application. After this step, if you want to use the same collection anywhere in other applications, you can just copy paste this one, or you can also just start typing in and you would find that variable. See here, I have this variable available. So this variable after this step will become full. I mean, like the list will have some values, and I can use that collection anywhere inside the flow. Like I can use it in the step 10, or I can use it in step 15. It depends on how big is your lightning flows. And similar way, instead of one record, we are just getting a collection of record, and we are going to define which fields are you going to get it. So let's say I'm going to get name field, and I'm going to get status field. So this collection will have list of like 10 records, for example, and these 10 records will have only 2 columns. One column would be the name, and the second column would be the status. That's all it will return. There will be any other, there can be hundreds of fields in the object, but this list will show you only 2 columns. And internally you cannot see the columns, but the list which it returns you can use only these two fields. If you try to use some other field during a process of flow, it will give you an error that this particular field is not retrieved. So you would go back to this fast lookup and add one more row and say whichever field you want to retrieve, and then your flow again will work properly. So this will be the feeding source for this loop. So this is where the loop will come in. So when you are dealing with a collection of records, this is where your loop will come in. So I'll say loop through. So loop through which object? So which variable? Basically, it's not an object; it's a variable. So you're going to loop through a collection. You will always loop through a collection. You're not going to loop through a single variable. So it's always going to be a collection of variable. So collection of records. So we have this collection variable here. And if you want to order it, you can order it in ascending or descending, or if you don't want, you can just leave it as empty. And you would be again setting a variable. So this is like a pointer for your looping. Say, hey, first iteration should point to the record 1. Second iteration point to the record 2. So you are defining the variable for the pointer. So let's say variable pointer, or I'll say loop pointer. Oh, we didn't create the variable, so let's create the variable. Click on create new. So again, if you see, since this collection is a subject collection, you would have option to create only a subject variable, because this will directly bind to your object. So this is not like a temporary placeholder that you can use it in the. It is a temporary placeholder, but this temporary placeholder is binded to a custom object or a standard object. So I would say a subject variable, put in my name. So let's say I'm just going to use it for looping. So I would say I would use private, and again, similar fashion, you would define the object name from which object you are querying that you had queried that list, the same object name you would put in. So now this object variable has been created. You cannot use this variable technically, logically you cannot use this anywhere, but it will anyways be available all over the application. But before using this variable, so logically think about it, like if you want to use this variable should be pointing to one collection, right? So if you want to use this variable anywhere in the application, you can use only inside the loop, and you should point to one particular list. So I'm pointing this variable to a list, and this pointer, it is like literally think about like a pointer pointing to a record. And it will, when you do the looping, when the looping is execution, it will be looping through record 1, record 2, record 3. So it will go on like that. And this is the variable to point to that records. I would say okay. And I would connect this to elements like this. I can also, if you have some other elements under for a single record execution, I can connect that also. Like for any element to any element, you can connect this, but this doesn't make sense. So this makes sense, right? So when you do a fast lookup, you get a collection of records, and you are going to loop through that records. So you're doing a loop element here. And on each loop, if you want to do a record update, for example, so what you would do is, so you would say update application. So you would be choosing the object where you're going to update this application, obviously. And if you want to set a filter criteria, you can set, or you can leave it as it is. And you would say which variables you are going to update, and what is the value you are going to update. So this is another scenario where you can either put in a standard variable that is like status value, or you can put in the subject variable which you created. So if you see here, the subject variable where loop pointer is a pointer which we defined, under the pointer, it automatically brings you all the fields you had for that object. And you can choose, but you can choose only 2 fields that you have for that object in that first lookup, because you didn't call out other fields. So we can technically use it here, but it will obviously give you error. So if you use like status, then it will not give you error because you had that already fetched in the previous step. I would say okay. Oh, we need to set up a record. Okay, so you need to update a particular record, right? So you definitely need to set up this filter criteria. Say I would say where ID, it's similar to a record lookup, but you're identifying the record, which record you're going to update. Say similar way I hard-coded, I would put in the same value in here. So I would say go to this record in application where ID is matching with this value, have this record on hold to update, and fetch the status of that record from this particular pointer and this particular status value field, and put that field value back inside this record. So which means when it loops through a list of records, and for each iteration, it's going to pull the status value from that iteration and put that status value into this record. I mean, logically it doesn't make sense for this, but I'm just showing you how the record update works. And you can connect that here. So which means, so when you connect the loop variable, a loop element to the record update element, you see a question asking to you, so what iteration should this execution happen? So do you want to happen for each iteration, or do you want to happen when there are no more values in the process? So you can say like each iteration you want to map that value to the status value in the record. So on a best practice, it is not a good design to like do an update for each iteration. So I would say construct another collection variable where you can hold all the status values updated locally, and then just do a record update altogether. So that can be like a fast. Anything with the keyword fast, it means the collection. So it's fast lookup, the fast update, the fast create. So everything means a collection. So rather than doing a single record update on single record lookup, single record create, you can do a collection creation, collection updation, collection lookup also. So that's the crux of the whole elements in here. So these are categories of data because you deal with the data elements in that each element under this data category. So this is the whole list of elements we pretty much have here. And as I told, we can also do a timer. I'll explain all these pretty much in detail on another session in future. We are planning to have a like advanced level of flow designing. So we'll come back to that, and I will also be explaining you how we can call a email alert, how we can call a quick action here, how we can do a static action, and also you can do a submit for approval in this flows. So we'll go through those scenarios in future for one of the sessions. And that's pretty much for the palette panel here. And if you see the second tab, it's the resources. So this is where you will create either variable collection. So you would have noticed everything we did while we created that element. So whatever the variable you created on the fly when you started to do the actions. I mean, when you started to do the logic. But if you, when you get used to the flows, and if you are very comfortable with the flows, and you know what step and what variable you want to create, you can directly create it here and use it there. Say if I say variable text, and if I keep it private here, so I created a variable text here, and if you go on the fast lookup, let's say record lookup. So if I want to assign that variable text, whatever, I might have captured it in a different screen, and that variable can be used here. So if you see here, the variable text which I created outside of this particular element, it is also available here. So it's not that whatever you create inside this element is available. So if you create a variable here, you can use that in the last element as well, this record update as well. So pretty much whatever you create inside this flow, everything will be available on any step of this flow. It's just that you need to logically think about like whether this variable is the correct variable for that particular element. Can we use that type of variable for this particular step? It's all about the analytical reasoning on how to use the variables. And we will explain you through all of these elements in the advanced sessions. So these are like basically the types of variables that you can create. You can create a collection variable, which will hold a static list of collection. And you can create a subject variable where you can query a list of collection from an object and then hold it inside one variable. Or you can have it like a collection variable where you have the full list of collection rather than one pointer. So this is where you will create the pointer. A subject variable will be always the pointer for the record inside a collection, and this is where the source collection will come from. And this is like a stage where you can define pick list as a stage in the UI and then use that as a variable inside. So this is something released newly. We'll come back to that later in the advanced sessions. And this is like a constant, like say this variable is not going to change anywhere in the application. Say right from step 1 to step 15, if there is going to be a constant that is available, say an example, you're doing a manipulation where you're using, let's say the same representation. The pi value is not going to change universally. So the pi value is going to remain same for everywhere in the application. So you can define, say, variable constant, and say the value is testing, the text data type. So I'm putting testing as value, and if I say OK, so wherever I use this constant variable inside this applications, the value is going to be testing. That cannot be changed. So I can like temporarily create constant variables and then use it anywhere in the application rather than hard coding it in every places. So one good example would be if you are using an application number, particular application number for that flow, and then if you want to hard code it in all the stages of the page, stages of the elements, you don't have to hard code it in every element. You can just use this variable. So that's basically it. And this is similar to a formula, your formula field. Whatever you do with your fields in the formula, you would be doing with variables here. So you can have 2-3 variables, and you can concatenate to form a string and use that string as a formula element. And the text template is going to be like a predefined text template that you can use it anywhere in the flow. And these are all like the choices as you saw in the flow elements. If you are using a pick list value and you want to map the pick list value to a radio buttons in the UI, you can do that. We'll cover up everything in a detailed session where we will go through creating all these variables one by one. And dynamic record choice is like these are all the choices that will be generated in the Lightning flows, and that can be reused in any part of the flows. Like consider it as like a manipulated pick list, and that can be used inside this flow dynamically based on your selections. And this is like the straightforward pick list choices. So you can map it to either a single list of pick list choice, or you can map it to a multi-select pick list. And this is like pretty much like your dump of all whatever the elements you created. It can be the screen element, it can be the flow element, it can be your variable right from your granular detail. Everything is going to be dumped as a list here. So whatever you created, the whole collection is going to be here. So that's why I told the whole, each and every part of variable, whatever you create, it's available for the whole flow. So you can use it in the step 1, you can use it in the step 15 again. So it's like pretty much one variable you create for the whole flow. So this is all about like creating and playing around with a flow design. So let me jump back to, I'm not going to save this. Let me jump back to the demo flow which I had. So let me quickly walk through what we have done in that flow, and then I'll show you the demo how it works in the UI. So what I have done is I have kept a lookup. Forget about the naming. So I was playing around with some other logic as well. So I have created a record lookup. So I was asking the record lookup to look up at the application and match the ID with a record ID. So this is a temporary variable which I created to capture the record ID from the flow UI. So when you say you want to pass a record ID, what you can do is, I'll come back to that later. I'll show you. So you can pass a ID, or it can be any text form of string, or it can be a date, whatever the value you want to pass from this page, you can still pass it as a value or as a variable. You can pass it to the flows that is sitting in this button, and those IDs will be passed into the flow to match up with the record here. So I'm saying this record ID is coming from the screen, from this whole screen, and that will pick up this ID from the URL. So technically it works this way. So it picks up the ID from the URL and it passes it to my flow, and the flow will instruct the record lookup to look up to that particular ID and capture that particular records fields. So what are the fields we are going to capture is this performance factor and recruiter comments. So basically this is being a job application. So we have two fields in the job application where you have this performance factor and you have this recruiter comments. So where this is where the interviewer will put in their feedback as a performance factor. They will select one of the choices on the screen, and they will select they will type in the comments like why this candidate justifies that particular performance factor. And you can also, if there is no value that is being coming up from the record, then you can also say assign null value to that. If there is no value coming up from from these fields, then you can say assign null values for that. So that's an option. And so what I'm doing here is I'm looking up that record, and I'm going to pull out that two fields because I'm going to fill in those two fields. I'm going to submit that record again. So on the first step, it's going to be looking up to that particular record, and it will have it in a temporary placeholder. And the next is going to be the presenting the screen. So when I click on this button, the first step is it's looking up to the record and then presenting me a screen. So that is the second step, presenting a screen. And this is going to say who's the previous employer, what is expected salary, when are you available to join. So that I have placed a date field. If you see here, this is the system variable I have used. So if you go here, and if you go system and global variables, you can choose the current date and time or current date. So since being a date field, it's going to capture only the date. And you can also make that field required on your screen so that it will fire a validation when you're not filling in the values. So I have kept required for all of these variables, all of the screen inputs. And this performance factor is coming from the pick list value for which I created a variable. So if you see, this variable is being captured during the record lookup. Sorry, not here. So if you go to here, here. So if you see pick list choice, so this is a resource which you will create internally. Say I want to hold the pick list values directly. You can create this pick list choice, either this one or that one. And you can create a variable. And if you see this variable definition, so I'm defining a name for it, and I'm saying this is a pick list value, and I'm saying which object it is coming from and which field it should be taking the values from. So you need not look up to a record for that, because this is like a definition for the field itself. So you're grabbing that field and generating the list of pick list values. So you're not looking up to one particular record. So if you see there is no relation to fields in this one, it just says which field you want to grab the pick list values from. And I'm using that pick list values here to map it to the front end, the UI radio buttons. So I'm declaring the choice type as radio buttons, and then I'm obviously the data type is going to be text. I'm making it as required. You can choose to have a default value, or else you can leave it empty. Here is where you will map the choice. So I have a collection of pick list values, and I'm mapping the pick list values to the choice. So it will directly pre-populate all my pick list values here as radio buttons, if you see here. So after that, we have this comments, should be recruiter comments. So once that is done, you will click next. Let's see what happens in. Let's see. Available to join, say I'm available from next Friday. And based on my performance, they say I need one more round of interview. Needs another round of interview. And I click on next, it's going to the next screen. So this screen is after a decision. So I'll quickly show you what happens next. So once this screen has been designed, you're going to hit OK. So that's going to save your screen here. And next you will be dragging and dropping the decision box. So there are like 3 outcomes that you can define. I mean, for my process, I have like 3 outcomes. You can define how many other outcomes. So I would say first, well, let's define when he's not eligible for the selection. So when I have like option 5, so that is going to be, let's go to the previous screen. Option 5 is rejected. So when I hit 5 here and then click next, it's going to be rejected. So I would say if it is 5, then the outcome would be not selected. The not selected outcome will be mapped to a screen. I'll show you that. And here you're just defining the outcomes. Now you will be mapping those outcomes to certain flow elements. So let's define it first. So when we say further we need interviews, so that's when you select 2, 3, and 4. And I say if any of these values, so each pick list value corresponds to an OR, and the default outcome. So you will define as many as outcomes it comes out, and then there must be a default outcome. Say if any of those options doesn't apply for him, then what should be the final outcome? So the final outcome would be if any of this 2, 3, 4, 5 is not being selected, so then obviously it's going to be the 1. So what is the outcome for 1? So you don't have to like necessarily define that outcome. So that's why they just kept it like default outcome. So it's like else part of everything. So if none of these definitions match with your criteria, then you directly jump into your default outcome. And if you see here, so this, if you see here, the links are not mapped. I mean, the links are not named here, but here it is named. That's specific to this decision box. So whenever you drag a link to a decision box, let's say like this. Whenever you drag a link, So initially I will be having something like this. I will have the decision box. I would say I will first design the screen. So, okay, this screen should show up. The candidate performance lower than the expectation, so he's rejected. And this screen should show up. The candidate performance needs an additional round of interview. And this screen can show up like the candidate performance outstanding, and he can directly go for a selection. And now we define the outcome there. Now I'll be mapping those outcome to these screens. So I would say, when I map to the first screen, it asks, so what is your outcome that you want to map? So I'm saying not selected. So because I think it's a rejection screen. Yeah, it's a rejection screen. So I'm saying not selected. And sorry. When you drag and drop here, it says, what's the next outcome you want to define for this screen? So the outcome is going to be further interviews, because that screen says additional interviews needed. And when you're done with the two other outcomes, when you're done with all your outcomes, it will automatically map the default outcome. It will not ask you an option. So this is how you will be mapping a decision to a particular screen, or it can directly go to this record update also. If you don't want to present a screen and you want to directly map it to a record update, or it can be record, again, some other manipulations with a record lookup also. So whatever the next element you want to do, whatever the next step you want to do, you can directly map it to that. It does not necessarily be a screen. It can be any element in the whole flow. And once the screen is shown up, I'm going to say we had interview needed. Go next. So once the screen is shown up, so I'm going to do the record update. So this is like basically giving for my scenario, for my use case, I'm going to give an option for the person who's filling in this questionnaire to go back to previous to change their options if they want to change, or they can proceed to the next. So I had a screen element in between the record update, and I'm doing a record update, and I'm going to do a success screen. So the success screen will say success, the interview feedback has been submitted. And this is where the record update will happen. So if you see the record update, so I'm again defining which object it should update and from where this record should be pulled in. And after pulling in that record, I'm going to map the fields. So it will basically map which date I'm going to join. It will basically map which selection I have made on that radio buttons. And these are all the variables which you will be creating for each of these screen variables. It can be either a screen variable. For example, whenever you map to a field from a screen, you would be given with two types of variables. Either you can create a new variable, or if you had a variable, it will obviously show up. Or if you have a screen variable, it will show up under the screen input fields. And this maps to the performance factor, and this maps to the recruiter comments. And once I hit OK, it's going to define the record update. And after the record update, what I want to do? I want to do a success screen. So let's see if I have defined a success screen. So once I click on next, I'm confirming that all my changes are good. I'm going to submit the record. Okay, there's some error going on. So this is another disadvantage with Lightning flows, where you would not know the error until you go back to your email and see what type of error it is. So let's see what type of error it was. Let me pull in the email which I received. So this is another, it's not like a, it is not like a disadvantage. It's something that we have to be careful. So I have this email come in. So it says a required field is missing. So this is something which I created today morning, the status field, and I purposefully didn't map it to one of the screen variables, so that this error shows up, and right now you have no clue of what this error is. And the only person who will get the email is the creator of that flow. So for example, if two persons are working on a flow and the first person has created the flow and the second person is appending that flow with some other conditions, it will go to the first person who created the flow. So that's like the ownership of the flow. So that's another disadvantage with that flow. But then if you are working as a single person on the particular flow logic, you can obviously have the error message laid out. So if you see here, the error message is pretty clear, and also the way it presents the error message for you, it's really laid out. So if you see each step, it will show you what all the steps it goes in. So it goes for record query, what it queried, and it will also show you which record it is queried, and what is the screen input you have given, and what are all the steps it is going through. And if you see here, it has gone through until the decision box, and the outcome is going to the screen 0. And after the screen 0, the step is failing in here, failed to update the record that meets the criteria. So, the final error message, what it gives is that the record field is missing here, and if you see what field it is the status field. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the field altogether so that we can continue this process.
Hey Gua, why do they call it an interview?
You mean the flow interview?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know the history of why they named it as an interview, but so each transaction is called as interview inside flows.
Got it.
Yeah, I don't know the reasoning behind that, but
Yeah. Because it's
called as
confusing because
interview.
you're building a recruiting app, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
so people might think that's part of the recruiting app.
Exactly. So good that you brought it up. So if anywhere you see here, it is a flow interview. If it says the interview, so it's not that our application interview. It's the flow is named as interview. If you see here, the flow interview. So the flow transaction is named as interview. It's not that interview from this application. To So here's the status field I created, and I'm going to, oops, I should have deleted from here. So yeah, so I deleted that, and let's see if I refresh and I do the same process, it should work. Because now the field is not in the scene at all. So I made a decision and I click next. It says success, the interview feedback has been submitted. And I finish. You see here the performance factor has changed. My comments has been updated here. And my latest joining date is also been updated here. So these two fields are not mapped in the flow, so don't worry about this. So I didn't map it. I didn't have time to finish that mapping. I can show you how to map those fields as well. I can quickly do that. We will be selecting previous employer, and we will be going to this variable. So no, not the variable. So you're getting the value from the screen. So you need to do a screen input field. So what is the field we have to fill in? The employer field. And then again, expected salary, right? So we are choosing the salary field, and we are going to oh, okay. I think it's because of the field definition there. So I kept the field as number. So whenever you have a field, the screen input field is defined as text, and I'm mapping it to a number, trying to map it to a number. So that's why if you see, the variables will not show up. It's because I'm trying to map a number field to a text value. So that's another thing you have to keep in mind. So these are all the minor things you have to plan ahead. Like if you are mapping something to the data types, it has to be the same data types. So these are all the granular level of details you have to look through when you start to design a flow. So for now, let's keep this one. Say okay. I'm going to save as a different version. So once you save a flow, you would go back here and click on activate on that version. So if you see, I have so many versions here, and I am activating the latest one. So let's see, and you will be refreshing that back because you need to bring in the latest version into this button. So let's say employer 1. Anyway, this is not going to be saved. Let's say 28 in here. I'm choosing as option 3 to show you the difference. Need more interview. Click on next. So I'm finalizing my decision. Click on next. Feedback has been submitted. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't finish the interview. Sorry. You need to click on the finish button to do the record update. Interview. Making a decision. Next. Finish. So if you see, my previous employer is now updated. Earlier it was not mapped, so it was not updated. Once you map it, you get the updation here, and the latest joining date and everything else has been recorded. So this is the basic way of constructing a flow. So including my seminar, I took basically how much of time I would say. Probably if I started from scratch, this whole thing would have taken me like 2 hours. Rather, if I go with a screen design as a Visualforce and Apex, it would have probably even for an expert developer, it would have taken at least more than a half a day to do this whole page and the class and the test class, and he has to do the unit testing and then put it back into your org to do your final live. So it's pretty much cutting down most of your development effort and your time, saves a lot of your resources. So that's the major advantage with the Lightning flows with simple use cases. Say use cases like this can be easily designed in flows rather than going with a Visualforce and Apex.
Yeah, it's also easy to maintain when you hand over to another team.
Yeah, that's right. So this is I think we are almost nearing the end of the session. So I'll show one more scenario and I will probably wrap up, and we will continue this in the further sessions.
Okay.
So let's go to the next flow which I have. So basically this flow will demonstrate you the looping through of records. So if you see here, I have another button called work history. So let's say I am putting in my application number. So A12345 So that's my application number, and I click on next. So it's showing me a screen with the consolidated list of previous employers I have worked with. So it says this candidate has worked for the number of companies which I have as a child records. This is the number of child records, and it says previous employer, or it is listing out the list of employers. So, and when I click on finish, it's going to come back to the same screen. So let's see how it is being designed. So the first time when I click, um, it's giving me a screen with an input box asking for application number. So that's the start of this flow. And whenever you completed designing the elements, you have this small arrow in every element. So this will set as the start element of the flow. So if I set this one, my flow will start from here. It will not show up the screen at all. If I set this one, the flow will start from the screen. So it can be even in this part of the screen. So whenever you want to set the starting point of the flow, you can just click on this icon and it will be set as the starting point of the flow. And so this screen obviously has one text field, and this text field will have a value holded in it. And in the record lookup, the next step is going to be the record lookup based on that particular application number. So this is where I told instead either you can pass record ID, or you can pass a hard-coded value, or you can hold that passed variable from the screen and use that screen variable here. So if you see, the application number was the screen input field. So I'm using the input field variable directly and matching up with the name of the application record, and that will return me one record. So this is a record lookup, so that will return me one record. So that record, from the record, I'm just grabbing the ID of the application. I don't need any other fields. So I'm going to grab the ID of the application, and this is the parent object's ID. So with the parent object's ID, I'm going to do a fast lookup on the child object. So fast lookup is basically the collection, as I told you. So work history is the object. I have it as a child that is looking up to the parent. So work history will have a field called job ID. So this is a lookup field from the child object work history to looking up to the application object. And that should be equal to the application ID which I captured in the previous step. So I'm saying, okay, go to work history object, match with this job ID equals to application ID. So that will be the collection of records that I want to have for the list of childs. So basically, this job application can have any number of childs, right? So my previous employees can be like 4 or 5, and I have my records in my system as a child object, and I want to just query all the child records from the parent object. So I'm doing a query. It's basically a query happening here. Query from the child object based on the job ID, and put back into a collection. So I'm calling it as a subject collection work history, and that is a variable name for the list of records. And I'm, as I told you, I'm querying 2 columns from that. I'm going to query the name of the employer and also the ID of the record, just to have it for a reference. Or you can just query we may not be using the ID, so you can just query the employer name also. And I'm looping through the collection, not the object. So I'm looping through the collection of records, and then obviously sorting it with a ascending order. And this is the pointer variable. So as we saw earlier, we defined a pointer variable. So this is the pointer variable, loop variable we call it. And once you define that, you're looping through each iteration. So this is where you will define. So whenever for this scenario, so the looping will happen like the pointer variable will point to the first record in the collection. So you need to define what is the next step. So when it goes to the next step, it will update to a counter. So I have defined a local variable called counter, and that's an operator called add, and you can add a number value or you can concatenate it with strings. So I have done both. I'll show you how it works. So this counter will maintain the number of applications here. So let me put in the ID again. So this is a counter variable. So this is a variable that I used, that I locally created, and I'm keeping adding for each iteration. So I want to know how many iteration it goes through. So these number of iterations will give me the number of child records. So that's the basic logic I designed here. So this candidate has 4 iterations, which means 4 child records, which again means 4 companies in my work history. And I'm already querying an employer from the object collection, and I'm going to assign it to the employer local variable, and I'm going to append that employer name with a line break. You see here, this is a small tag for line break. So, if you are familiar with HTML, this is basically to give a line break between each name that is being captured. Say Acumen Solutions. Instead of bringing this Guha's Devforce onto the side, on the right hand side of the Acumen Solutions, it will do a line break and put it in the next line. So these are like small developer hacks that we do. But basically the crux is you assign that employer name to a variable here. And when you specify as add, when you put it as equal, that will just replace the values for each iteration. So it's based on the iteration. So for each iteration, it is going to come back here and go back here, come back here and go back here. So it's going to do the same thing for 4 iterations. So for 4 iterations, I need to keep appending the variables, not replacing the variables. So that's why we use add operator. So these are local variables, and we capture the value and we keep appending them. And since I append along with the line break, it will automatically do a line break there. And once this end of the loop is come, you need to define that as well. So this is where the other difference comes from, say, a programmatic approach or a process builder. It will not automatically take care of the end of the loop. So you need to define what it has looped through 4 elements and what it should do after 4 iterations. So it will be waiting for you to define that result. So whether you have to just stop there or you want to present a screen with the results. So that's where you will define one path will go in here for the next step. The other path will come back again to the iterations. And once all the iterations is done, you will define an end of loop path. So the end of loop will say, for our use case, it will say present a screen with all these text values. So if you see here, I have put in this display text. This is output variable, my output screen element. So I have put in the display text here. These are all basically a hack for doing a line break. So if I want to in a screen, you cannot do a programmatic approach. Rather, you can do add 2 more line breaks with empty display text, so that it gives you spacing between the first line and the previous employer. So I have done. I have written the statement this candidate has worked for. You can insert the variable in between whatever the text you have. So the variable you will be choosing it from here. Go here and choose counter. You see here it comes up here. So let's remove that now. So I have put it in a variable, and you can also format that variable in the text formatting however you want to present. So I made it as blue bold text. And if you see here, the last section would be the previous employers. And as I told you, it's a temporary variable that holds a list of employees. It's not just one element employer. So it's going to be list of employers. So as we saw in this assignment, it is appended with a line break. So it automatically generates. It's a single variable, but it holds a text string divided by the line breaks. So that it appears like a list in the UI if you go here. So this is basically one single variable that can hold a text string containing a line break. So it becomes like a list. So it's a small hack that we do sometimes when you want to present certain things in certain way in the UI. So these are all the out-of-box thinking you might be doing along with just straightforwardly designing a flow. So however way you want to design the screen, So there are, since the screens are limited to certain way of styling it, we have to sometimes think out of box, similar to this, like doing a line break or doing a spacing with some other tags so that it appears pleasant on the screen.
That's a
So yeah,
really good tip.
yeah, that becomes like your part of creativity, however you want to do it. So they give you a basic functionality. Yeah, you can do this way in this particular format. And if you want to add more creativity to it, it's up to you how you want to design it.
I mean, in the future, they will let you add CSS to this, right? Or is that not
Yeah,
happening?
so now they have it in their roadmap, I guess. I saw a couple of presentations from the Dreamforce and even the Trailhead. So they have a very good roadmap for Lightning flows. Now they are imposing Lightning flows as a declarative approach for all the consultants and admins to go with little more complex out-of-box features rather than depending on process builders and depending on a development team to do certain things. Now they had this product, so this is where I told like this was not talked on a frequent basis in the future for the past. It's been there for past 3 years. Can you believe that? And not many people know about it. So that's why Salesforce team is now pushing into the Lightning flows where now we have brought it to Lightning experience. Now start using them. Don't always go with development for everything. So start using declarative approaches.
Got it. So,
Yep.
guys, what I'm going to do is now that I recorded this uh, video, I am gonna put together a table of contents with the exact timing, the exact minute where each concept is covered, and I want to see if it would be helpful to you if Guha um, created this as a managed package, basically in in a format where you can install it in your own developer org and play around with it yourself. Do you think that would be helpful?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, once we start playing around with it, it'll give us some more insight, and I think we'll have more questions at that point.
Yeah, and as I told you, it's very basic level. What I told you, you can do a lot of things with flows.
Oh yeah.
So to
Now,
give you an idea,
yeah.
in my previous project, we have very complex enterprise level implementations
Mm.
where we had flows implemented for a customer. I cannot reveal the customer, but for a customer whose user base was around 3,000 people, and every day they are using that flows instead of visual force page.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, so it can be scaled up to any level of complexity, but the only caveat there is you need to be mindful about the number of iterations you can do in a flow and the number of executions you can do in a flow. So it's limited to 2,000 iterations or 2,000 executions. So as
Oh,
long as your requirement is within that limit, you can always. I think I can also show you the screen so that it get captured in your recording, so that when you go back to this recordings, you can check out this limitations. So these are the limitations given for the
oh,
flows.
okay. Yeah, this will be helpful.
Yeah. So when you see here, it's called as interviews. The flow interviews is basically one flow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Why
I
do
don't
they
know
call?
the reasoning
Why do they
behind
call it
why they
interviews?
call it as interviews.
Funny name. Okay. Now this is good.
Cool.
Cool, guys. It's noon, exactly 12. We had a late start, so that's why we had to go a little over time. But
Yeah, no problem.
I really appreciate Guha putting this together and going into such detail. So what I'm going to do is create a blog post, embed the video in there, put a table of contents with the exact minute where Guha covers each topic that he went through in detail. So you can quickly fast forward to that section if you're if you're working on a project and you want to revisit Gua's presentation. You can just fast forward to that point, to that area where Gua covers that topic. And
Okay.
and the other
Now,
thing, yeah, the other
if
thing
we
is
have, sorry,
that?
one second, Gavin. If we have any questions or anything, can we contact you or Gua, or who's the main contact person?
Certainly, yeah. You can contact contact me. I'm sure Gua is easy to find on LinkedIn as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like you can shoot in a LinkedIn message, or I'm available on the chatter as well. Just tag me in the chatter and post your question so that if it can help other people also, it will be great.
Okay, that'll be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll add you to the chatter group, Roches. I haven't added you. Once I add you, you can also see past recordings of
okay, wonderful.
What we've done.
Okay, that's great.
All right, guys. If you have no further questions, we are officially out of time. But thank you so much, Gua. I really appreciate you coming on a Saturday and sharing the wealth of your knowledge with the community.
No problem at all. I'm glad to help people.
Thanks, Gavin.
You're welcome.
Okay, thanks a lot,
Thanks,
Gavin and Gua, and yeah, we'll be in touch.
Yep.
Yeah.
See you guys.
See you guys.
Take care.
Bye.
Have a
Bye, Barbara.
Bye.